Today, we're tackling a really interesting challenge, actually, trying to understand what it truly means to be a full stack developer right now.
Yeah, it's a term that gets thrown around a lot.
It really does. And our exploration is kind of fueled by these firsthand observations from someone who's been doing a ton of interviews recalling their...
And we're mixing that with, a whole range of experiences shared by other developers out there.
Exactly. So our mission really is to cut through the buzzwords. Let's get to the core of what full stack actually involves.
You are listening to Merge Conflicts Real Dev Talk, where passionate developers tackle code, culture, and everything in between.
First thing that really jumps out from experience, the interviewer, is this recurring struggle they saw with really fundamental JavaScript concepts.
Okay. Like what specifically?
Well, consistently seeing candidates, even folks using popular frameworks like React, who didn't seem to have a solid grip on things like closures.
Right, how functions remember their surroundings.
Exactly. Or hoisting, the event loop, async behavior in general. Basic but critical stuff.
Yeah, foundational. And it wasn't just like a vague familiarity problem, was it? The interviewer seemed to point out a real lack of deep understanding.
Totally. A lack of understanding of how these frameworks, like React, actually work inside. Things like hooks, context, the component lifecycle, even reconciliation.
Yeah.
How React updates the UI efficiently.
Right. So people know how to use the tools, maybe follow tutorials, but they don't quite grasp the machinery underneath.
That's the crux of it. And that connects straight to another observation they had.
Which was?
This tendency for developers to call themselves full stack when maybe their skill set was a bit, limited in certain areas.
Yeah, so...
The interviewer mentioned candidates who were fine with basic HTML, CSS, maybe a back-end framework, but didn't show a strong foundation in, say, front-end architecture, managing state effectively, or those core JavaScript behaviors we just talked about.
Gotcha. It's almost like knowing how to, drive a car, but not understanding anything about the engine or transmission.
Good analogy.
Yeah.
And the interviewer's main point really hit home for me. Being full stack should mean you have a solid understanding of how the browser works.
Yeah.
How data moves through the whole system front to back, back to front. And the performance side of things, too.
Definitely. It's about understanding the why behind your code, not just knowing the steps to make something run.
And that immediately brings up this wider debate in the tech community, doesn't it?
About the definition itself.
Exactly. What is full stack? The expectations seem all over the place.
Yeah, some people pointed out how unclear it is. Like, are we talking full stack front end, full stack back end, or someone who's genuinely expert level in both, which seems rare.
It does. And then there's the concern that job descriptions often seem to expect the impossible, right?
Oh, totally. Expertise in design, UI, like multiple front-end frameworks, back-end stuff, databases, and DevOps.
It's a huge list. It feels like the term keeps stretching without anyone defining realistic boundaries for one person.
But then there's the other side of that coin, isn't there?
What's that?
The counterpoint that, developers almost have to use the full stack label.
Right. Because so many job ads ask for it, even if the role doesn't really need that massive breadth of skill.
Precisely. So it becomes this keyword you need on your resume to even get noticed, whether you feel you truly fit that maybe unrealistic definition or not.
So you end up with this mismatch. Job titles don't always reflect the actual job.
Yeah, it creates confusion for everyone. We really need more clarity, better communication from both sides, companies and candidates.
And maybe this fuzziness around the role is part of why we see that lack of foundational knowledge sometimes.
How do you mean?
Well, there's this feeling, reflected in some comments, that maybe developers are too focused on chasing the newest, trendiest tech.
Without nailing down the principles first.
Exactly. Without that solid understanding of why things work the way they do underneath those shiny new tools.
That makes sense. It's like building on shaky ground.
Yeah. And people acknowledged, look, software engineering has so much terminology, it's hard to remember every single detail perfectly.
Oh, absolutely. No one has perfect recall.
Which led to some interesting suggestions about interviews, actually.
Like moving away from just trivia questions.
Sort of. The idea of using practical code snippets or asking scenario-based questions came up, ways to gauge actual competence, not just memorization.
Yeah, see how someone thinks through a problem. I like that.
And what's interesting, too, is this idea that maybe the ideal of a developer being deeply expert in every single layer, maybe that's not always realistic or even necessary.
Right. You can still build great things with a team where people have different strengths, Maybe broader knowledge in most areas, but deep verbs in one or two.
Exactly. Someone might be primarily back-end focused, but gradually learns more front-end. Or the other way around. It's often a T-shaped skill set,
Yeah.
Broad, with a deep specialism.
So full stack becomes less about hitting some mythical finish line of total mastery.
And more about the journey, continuous learning, picking things up from real-world projects.
And crucially, having that curiosity, right?
Yeah.
Wanting to understand the why, even if you're not the #1 expert in that specific area.
Absolutely. That intellectual curiosity seems key.
And this whole evolution of the full stack idea kind of mirrors how web development roles themselves have changed over time, doesn't it?
It really does. You can trace it back. Remember when designers were often expected to code the front end too?
Yeah, the designer-developer hybrid.
Then we saw more separation. UI development became its own thing. Then front end grew to include not just the UI, but complex application logic.
And then, boom, frameworks like Angular, React, Vue arrive.
Right. And suddenly the expectation seemed to be, okay, now master all of these too, which is, well, a lot.
It really is. It feels like we just kept piling responsibilities onto this one front-end or full-stack title.
Yeah.
A lot of discussion around, like, memorization quizzes and interviews.
The classic slice versus splice question in JavaScript.
That exact example came up, and the feeling was generally, look, knowing common tools is useful, obviously.
Sure.
But testing someone's ability to recall exact syntax on the spot, is that really the best measure of how they perform on the job?
Probably not. They can look it up in 2 seconds, right? It's understanding when and why to use it that matters more.
Precisely. And there was an interesting point about JavaScript hoisting, too.
Yeah.
Someone pointed out that, okay, in modern code with linters, especially TypeScript, you might not encounter classic hoisting issues as often.
True. The tooling helps prevent it. But understanding the concept still gives you a better mental model of how JavaScript actually runs your code. It's still valuable knowledge, even if you don't hit the bug daily.
That's a really good point. It deepens your understanding.
Which brings us back, again, to that core idea. The why is so much more important than just the how.
It seems to be the recurring theme here.
Yeah, we heard stories, anecdotes about developers who might put improved performance by X% on their resume. But when you drill down, they can't clearly explain what the original problem was or why their specific fix actually worked.
Right. They just followed some steps or copied a pattern without grasping the underlying reason.
Exactly. And that deeper understanding, that ability to really analyze and question why things are built a certain way, that often comes with experience.
And that curiosity we mentioned, actively trying to learn the fundamentals.
Yeah. But then there's this other frustrating thing that came up. The experience some candidates have, where they go through these incredibly tough interviews, grilling them on deep technical stuff, best practices.
Okay, sounds intense.
And then they get the job, and they find the actual code base is like a mess. Poorly maintained, none of those standards being followed in reality.
Oof. That's got to be demoralizing. A real disconnect between the interview gauntlet and the day-to-day reality.
Totally. It really highlights that mismatch we talked about earlier.
So wrapping up this deep dive, it feels pretty clear that full stack is, well, complicated.
Definitely complex.
Yeah.
And often loaded with expectations that might be a bit unrealistic.
And that true understanding, real competence, seems to hinge on grasping those core concepts, the fundamentals.
The why behind the tech, not just the how of using a specific library or framework.
Yeah. And there's definitely a call for more clarity, maybe more honesty from the industry and in hiring, focusing more on that foundational knowledge.
Setting more realistic bars for what one person, a full-stack developer, can and should be expected to know deeply.
Absolutely. Which leads to a final thought, maybe for you listening.
Yeah.
Take a second and think about your own path in tech. Where's your focus? Is it mainly on learning the latest how-tos, or are you also digging into the why?
That's a great question. How can you build that deeper understanding that goes beyond just the surface level?
Exactly. That understanding that will serve you well no matter what the next hot framework is or what job titles are trending. Something to definitely keep exploring, I think.
For sure. A constant conversation in our field.